Mr. Musk, free speech isn't a tech experiment. It's the foundation of our republic. Right now you're destroying it. The words thundered across the stage like a cannon blast, slicing through the polished calm of the studio lights. Donald Trump leaned forward in his chair, eyes locked on Elon Musk, fingers stabbing the air as if pointing out the accused. Gasps erupted from the audience, some in shock, some in delight, the kind of sound that ripples through a room when history decides to pause and watch itself unfold. Across from him, Elon Musk sat back, his face unreadable, the faintest hint of a smirk betraying the storm gathering behind his eyes. He waited, not just for the noise to die down, but for the weight of Trump's accusation to settle over every viewer tuning in across America. And then, with a calm that cut deeper than any shout, he spoke. "No, Mr. President. What's destroying democracy is censorship dressed up as patriotism." A fresh wave of murmurs rolled through the crowd. It wasn't just a debate. It was a duel of visions. One man, the populist firebrand who once held the highest office in the land, now casting himself as the guardian of free speech. The other, the billionaire technocrat who built rockets and rewired global communication, now positioning himself as the liberator of truth from political control. The stakes weren't just about tweets or posts. They were about who gets to define the boundaries of speech in a digital age, who wields power over the world's town square, and what that means for democracy itself. Every sentence carried echoes of something larger: culture wars, election battles, global narratives, and neither man seemed willing to back down. Trump leaned closer, voice dropping to a growl. "You call it censorship. I call it protecting Americans from chaos." Musk's eyes narrowed. "And I call it fear. Fear of losing control." Silence fell. Cameras zoomed in. Millions held their breath, because no one in that room, or watching across the world, and was ready for how far this clash was about to go. This wasn't just a debate about tweets. It was a battle over the soul of the First Amendment. What unfolded on that stage was far bigger than a clash of egos. It was the collision of two visions for America's future. One rooted in government authority and national security, the other in radical free speech and technological disruption. Billions of people log into social platforms every day, scrolling, posting, arguing, learning. But behind every click lies a question more powerful than any algorithm: who decides what we see? For Donald Trump, the answer was clear and deeply political. "We've seen what happens when social media runs wild," he declared, turning toward the cameras as if speaking directly to every voter. "Foreign bots, fake news, anti-American propaganda, chaos. And chaos is how democracy dies." His words struck at the heart of populist anxieties, that without oversight, digital platforms become weapons in the hands of America's enemies and megaphones for those who want to tear the nation apart. To Trump and his allies, regulation wasn't about control. It was about protection. Protection from foreign disinformation. Protection from tech billionaires deciding elections. Protection from what he called the loud minority trying to rewrite America's story. In his framing, unchecked social media wasn't freedom. It was a threat. But Elon Musk saw it differently. Leaning into his microphone, voice steady, he countered with a vision as sweeping as it was provocative. "The greatest threat to democracy isn't bad speech," he said. "It's the belief that speech must be controlled." He spoke of dissent as the heartbeat of liberty, warning that every new regulation, no matter how well-intentioned, chipped away at the core of what made America unique. Musk painted a picture of a future where government oversight turned digital platforms into sanitized echo chambers, where only state-approved ideas could thrive. "When you regulate speech," he argued, "you don't protect democracy and you end it." It was more than a disagreement over policy. It was a philosophical duel: right-wing populism versus libertarian tech ethos, government oversight versus private sector autonomy, order versus chaos. Each man embodied a different answer to the same fundamental question: what does freedom look like in the digital age? And layered beneath the rhetoric was something deeper still. For Trump, regulation meant restoring power to the nation-state, and by extension to leaders like him. For Musk, Resisting regulation wasn't just about free speech. It was about preserving the power of innovators over institutions, individuals over governments. It was a tug of war over control, and the rope was the very narrative of democracy itself. The stakes were enormous. With elections looming and misinformation rampant, how America chose to govern its digital public square would ripple across the globe. Allies watched nervously, adversaries took notes, and millions of ordinary citizens, scrolling through feeds on their phones, wondered what future they were clicking toward. As Trump and Musk sparred, the tension in the room thickened. Each exchange drew sharper contrasts. Each rebuttal deepened the ideological divide. And beyond the studio, hashtags began trending. Pundits prepared their talking points, and political operatives recalibrated their strategies. Everyone knew this wasn't just another televised argument. This was the opening salvo of a political earthquake. Because in a world where speech shapes power, whoever wins this debate doesn't just win an argument. They define the future of democracy itself. And as the cameras rolled, the world watched that future being rewritten in real time. To understand the weight of Donald Trump's words on that stage, you have to rewind, back to the unlikely rise of a man who reshaped American politics with nothing more than a smartphone and a relentless instinct for spectacle. Long before he was a president, Trump was a brand, a name splashed across skyscrapers, casinos, and reality TV screens. But it was Twitter, more than any building or boardroom, that transformed him from celebrity curiosity into political juggernaut. He didn't just use social media, he weaponized it. In 280 characters, he bypassed the press, torched opponents, rewrote the news cycle, and rallied millions with a mix of outrage and bravado. It was raw, unfiltered, and unprecedented, and it worked. When Trump won the presidency in 2016, pundits credited his Twitter feed as much as his campaign rallies. It wasn't just a platform for communication. It was the beating heart of his movement. Every insult, nickname, and late-night tirade deepened his bond with supporters who saw in his defiance a reflection of their own anger at elites, media, and institutions they believed had forgotten them. Social media was no longer just a tool. It was Trump's megaphone, his shield, and his sword. But that sword would eventually turn against him. As his presidency wore on, Trump's tweets grew more incendiary, more conspiratorial, and more consequential. They fueled protests, spread falsehoods, and at times pushed the boundaries of legality. And then, in the aftermath of January 6, 2021, Silicon Valley struck back. Twitter, the very stage that had helped create President Trump, banned him. Facebook followed. YouTube imposed restrictions. Overnight, the man who had built an empire on speaking directly to the people was digitally exiled. The bans infuriated Trump and electrified his base. To them, this wasn't about terms of service. It was proof that powerful tech companies were colluding to silence conservative voices. Trump seized the moment, recasting himself not as a former president retreating into irrelevance, but as a martyr for free speech. "If they can silence me," he thundered at rallies, "they can silence you." His war with big tech became a central pillar of his post-presidency identity. He launched his own platform, Truth Social, promising it would be a bastion of uncensored speech. He railed against liberal censorship at every turn, and he made regulation, the very concept that conservatives had long resisted, into a populist rallying cry. "We're not going to let a handful of unelected billionaires decide what Americans can say," he declared, framing himself as the people's defender against an unaccountable digital oligarchy. Yet beneath the populist rhetoric lay deep contradictions. Trump, the self-proclaimed champion of free speech, had called for NFL players who knelt in protest to be fired. He had pushed to ban TikTok and sought to punish media outlets that criticized him. He demanded platforms crack down on voices he deemed anti-American, even as he blasted them for removing his own. His battle cry for freedom often sounded more like a demand for control. It was a strategy that had served him well throughout his career. Frame himself as the victim of powerful enemies. Rally outrage and turn that anger into influence. And it wasn't just about ideology. It was leverage. Every time Trump hinted at breaking up big tech or regulating social platforms, stock prices wobbled and executives scrambled. His threats weren't always about passing laws. They were about shaping the battlefield. Trump understood something fundamental about the modern political landscape. Power no longer flowed solely from government offices or newsrooms. It pulsed through the algorithms of Silicon Valley, through the invisible code deciding what billions of people read, watched, and believed. And he was determined not to be at the mercy of that power ever again, but his approach carried a darker edge. For all his talk of liberty, Trump's solution to big tech tyranny often involved handing more authority to the very government he claimed to distrust. He proposed sweeping regulations, floated the idea of revoking legal protections for platforms, and urged lawmakers to treat social media like public utilities. It was a paradox that defined his playbook. The man who rose by exploiting the chaos of free speech now sought to contain that chaos on his terms. And so, as he faced Elon Musk across the debate stage, Trump wasn't just arguing policy. He was defending a legacy, one built on tweets and turmoil, on outrage and amplification. He saw himself as the man who had harnessed the digital whirlwind and now sought to tame it. But the irony was impossible to ignore. The king of unfiltered speech now wanted the power to decide whose speech deserved to be heard. That contradiction, between principle and power, between populism and control, hung heavy in the air as Trump spoke. And for all his bluster and bravado, there was one thing he hadn't accounted for. Elon Musk wasn't another politician, and he wasn't about to be bullied. Before the world knew him as the man shaking up politics with a single algorithmic tweak, Elon Musk was something else entirely. A restless visionary with an almost mythic belief that the future could be rewritten by willpower alone. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, Musk was a boy who devoured science fiction and dreamed not just of invention but of escape, from bullies, from boundaries, from the ordinary. That hunger to build and disrupt would become the engine of his life. His path was anything but straight. After leaving South Africa as a teenager and landing in North America, Musk dove into the tech world of the late 90s with an intensity that set him apart. He co-founded X.com, an online banking startup that would merge into PayPal. And when PayPal sold to eBay in 2002, Musk walked away with a fortune. Most would have retired. Musk doubled down. He poured his wealth into companies so audacious they bordered on absurd. Electric cars when the industry laughed at the idea. Reusable rockets when space was still the domain of governments. Tesla and SpaceX weren't just businesses. They were crusades. Musk wasn't interested in incremental progress. He wanted revolutions. And one by one, he delivered them. Tesla shattered the stranglehold of fossil fuel cars, and SpaceX broke NASA's monopoly on reaching orbit. Along the way, Musk cultivated a cult-like following, part inventor, part provocateur, part philosopher, whose every tweet could move markets and ignite global debates. But as his influence grew, so did his frustration with a new frontier, the digital public square. To Musk, social media was supposed to be humanity's great amplifier, a place where anyone, anywhere could speak truth to power. Instead, he saw it becoming something smaller, narrower, more fearful. Speech was being policed, dissent throttled, accounts suspended for opinions once considered mainstream. This is not what free expression looks like, he warned, long before he would do anything about it. The breaking point came in 2022. Twitter, once the beating heart of the global conversation, had, in Musk's eyes, become a brittle echo chamber. Trust was eroding. Debate was suffocating under the weight of moderation policies that seemed arbitrary and ideological. Musk made a decision that stunned the world. He would buy the platform himself. $44 billion later, the world's richest man owned one of its most powerful megaphones. And he wasted no time renaming it X, a nod to his original dream of a universal platform for everything. To Musk, this wasn't just a business move, it was a mission. He called X the digital town square, a place where humanity's conversations about politics, science, art, and identity could unfold without gatekeepers. His philosophy was simple, almost radical. Speech should be as free as possible, even if that meant it was messy, uncomfortable, or offensive. Because to him, progress had always been born in the chaos of ideas colliding, not in the sterile safety of consensus. It was a belief that put him on a collision course with nearly everyone. Advertisers fled, worried about hate speech and brand safety. Lawmakers threatened investigations. Critics accused him of unleashing misinformation, empowering extremists, and dismantling the fragile guardrails of online discourse. Every move he made, from reinstating banned accounts to publishing internal Twitter files, exposing past censorship, drew outrage and applause in equal measure. Yet Musk did not waver. "Sunlight is the best disinfectant," he declared, echoing a century-old Supreme Court maxim. If democracy was to survive the digital age, he argued, it could not do so by suppressing dissent, even ugly, uncomfortable dissent. Better to confront bad ideas in the open than let them fester in the shadows. The cure for bad speech, he often said, is more speech. It was not an easy road. The company's value plunged, and journalists called his experiment reckless. Some predicted X would implode under the weight of chaos and controversy. But Musk, accustomed to rockets exploding on launch pads and factories teetering on bankruptcy, saw turbulence as proof he was challenging something entrenched, and he had always believed that institutions, whether government or corporate, should fear the individual's right to speak, not the other way around. This deep-rooted philosophy wasn't just intellectual. It was personal. Musk had spent a lifetime pushing back against limits. Governments that said rockets were for nations, automakers who said electric cars could never succeed, and now tech giants and politicians who believed speech should be filtered for public safety. To Musk, that impulse, however well-intentioned, was dangerous. Once you give someone the power to decide what's safe to say, he warned, you've given them the power to decide what's true. And so, when he walked onto that debate stage opposite Donald Trump, Musk carried with him more than just a CEO's stake in a social media company. He carried a worldview forged in the fires of disruption, a conviction that human progress depended not on controlling conversation, but unleashing it. He believed that even the most offensive speech was a price worth paying for the innovation, truth, and democracy that flourish only when voices are free. But he also knew this was no ordinary confrontation. Trump was not a tech journalist or a congressional committee. He was a former president, a political juggernaut with tens of millions of loyal supporters and a gift for bending public opinion. And Trump wasn't merely debating Musk's ideas. He was challenging Musk's very identity as a free speech absolutist. For Musk, the stakes were higher than any rocket launch or factory line. If he backed down now, the principle he'd built his empire on, that freedom must include even the speech we hate, would falter. But if he stood firm, if he could withstand the fury of a man who had once commanded the most powerful office on Earth, then perhaps the digital town square he envisioned could survive anything. And so, as the lights burned bright and the cameras rolled, Elon Musk squared his shoulders and met Trump's glare with calm defiance. He had disrupted industries, rewritten the future of cars and space travel, and now he was prepared to disrupt something far more entrenched, the politics of speech itself. And standing across from a former president with the world watching, that belief, that messy, unfiltered speech was the lifeblood of liberty, was about to be tested like never before. The air inside the packed auditorium was charged, the kind of volatile electricity that precedes a storm. Cameras zoomed in tight on the stage as Donald Trump leaned forward, voice dripping with disdain. "You're not a free speech champion, Elon," he sneered, his words slicing through the silence. "You're a chaos merchant. You're letting foreign propaganda run wild, hate speech flourish, and election interference thrive. You're not defending democracy. You're selling it out." The crowd erupted, half with cheers, half with jeers. Some rose to their feet, clapping thunderously at Trump's condemnation. Others booed loudly, waving signs that read "Free Speech Forever" and "Don't Silence Us." The split wasn't just in the audience. It was America itself, cleaved into two visions of its digital future. Musk didn't flinch. He waited for the roar to die down, then tilted his head slightly, almost amused. Regulation, he said evenly, is just censorship in a tuxedo, and censorship is how democracy dies. The words landed like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the hall. Trump's jaw tightened. Musk pressed on, his voice growing stronger, steadier, as if fueled by the tension. You talk about foreign propaganda. Do you really think authoritarian regimes are scared of a few bad tweets? They fear a society that can speak freely. They fear citizens who can question, criticize, organize. And every time you call for more government control over speech, you hand them a gift, because you're doing their job for them. Trump scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. Spare me the lecture, Elon. I know propaganda when I see it. Russia, China, Iran. They're all over your platform. And while they're pushing lies and division, you're busy preaching about chaos like it's a virtue. Chaos, Musk countered, is the price of liberty. It's the sound of millions of people thinking for themselves instead of being spoon-fed by bureaucrats. Democracy isn't tidy. It's loud. It's messy. It's supposed to be. That line hit a nerve. A pocket of the audience rose to their feet, chanting free speech, over and over. Others shouted back, regulate! The moderators attempted to quiet the room, but the debate had slipped beyond their control. This was no longer just an exchange of words. It was a referendum on what America believed itself to be. Trump leaned in, his tone sharpening. Here's the truth, he said. I fought harder than anyone to protect this country from disinformation, from manipulation, from people who hate what America stands for. And you've opened the floodgates. You've turned the public square into a sewer. And you want us to applaud you for it? Musk smiled, not mockingly, but almost sadly, like a teacher disappointed by a bright student's lazy argument. And yet, he replied softly, you use that same public square to rise to power. You tweeted your way into the presidency. You bypassed the media you despised and spoke directly to the people. And now that the conversation isn't under your control, you call it a sewer. That drew a roar. Laughter, applause, boos, curses, a cacophony of democracy itself. Trump's face flushed red. Don't twist my words, he shot back. There's a difference between free speech and anarchy. You've given a megaphone to terrorists, criminals, and America haters. And that's not liberty, that's lunacy. Musk's tone hardened. And who decides who the lunatics are? You, a government committee? A panel of unelected bureaucrats? Today it's the voices you hate. Tomorrow it's the voices that challenge you. That's how every censorship regime in history starts, with people who swear they're only silencing the dangerous ones. The room fell into a tense, uneasy hush. Even Trump paused, his retort caught behind pursed lips. Musk's gaze swept across the audience, and beyond them, to the millions watching from screens around the world. This isn't about me, he continued, his voice lowering to a near whisper that somehow carried across the entire hall. It's about whether we still trust free people to make sense of free ideas. Because if we don't, if we hand that power to governments or corporations, then democracy stops being a conversation. It becomes a script. And once it's scripted, it's over. For a brief moment, even Trump seemed thrown off balance. But the former president was never one to retreat. He straightened, jutted his chin forward, and fired back with a line meant to wound. Spare us the philosopher act. You're not saving democracy, Elon. You're breaking it. One reckless algorithm at a time. Boos, cheers, shouts. The audience was now on its feet, split into two furious, impassioned halves. The moderator's pleas for order were drowned out by the noise of a country wrestling with its own reflection. And amid the chaos, one truth became impossible to ignore. This wasn't a policy disagreement. This was a fundamental clash over the meaning of freedom itself. But as the volume swelled and the cameras zoomed tighter on Musk's face, his expression shifted. Calm, calculating, almost surgical. Because while Trump believed he had landed his hardest blow, Musk was preparing something far more devastating. And then Musk went for the jugular. The hall trembled with noise, chants clashing, tempers flaring, moderators pleading for order. When Elon Musk finally leaned into the microphone, the room quieted, not because anyone asked it to, but because something in his posture signaled the tide was about to turn. His voice, calm and deliberate, cut through the din. "Mr. Trump," he began, "you keep warning about foreign propaganda. And yes, it's a problem. No one denies that. But let's talk about the propaganda no one wants to discuss. The kind that doesn't come from Moscow or Beijing, but from right here." The audience shifted in their seats. Trump's lips tightened. Musk pressed on. "History is littered with governments, ours included, that silence dissent in the name of protection. During World War I, the U.S. government jailed Americans for opposing the draft. In the 1950s, careers were destroyed by accusations of being un-American. And just a few years ago, political campaigns pressured platforms to suppress stories they didn't like. Was that foreign interference? Or was that domestic censorship dressed up as patriotism?" Gasps echoed across the room. Trump's jaw clenched. He leaned toward his mic, but Musk wasn't finished. "You talk about foreign influence, but what about the domestic censorship that silenced millions?" Musk's tone sharpened, his words gaining speed. Entire movements throttled. Journalists shadow banned. Scientists deplatformed for questioning government narratives that later turned out to be false. That didn't come from China. That came from us. From people who claimed they were protecting democracy. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Musk let it breathe, then struck again. "And you say you love free speech, except when it's speech against you." Trump's head snapped up. "That's not true," he barked. But Musk didn't even glance his way. "You demanded that NFL players be fired for kneeling. You called the press the enemy of the people. You pushed to ban TikTok because you didn't like who owned it. You even tried to silence your own critics on Twitter before you were banned. And now you want us to believe you're the guardian of free expression?" The crowd gasped audibly this time. Trump's face flushed crimson. "That's a lie," he shot back, his voice rising. "I protected American values. I protected this country." Musk turned toward him slowly, his expression unchanging. "Protecting America isn't about silencing people you dislike," he said evenly. "It's about trusting that the people, not politicians, can sort truth from lies if they're allowed to hear them in the first place." The words hung heavy in the air. For a long moment, Trump said nothing. His fingers tapped on the podium, his eyes darting across the restless crowd. And then, breaking the silence, he did what he often did when cornered. He attacked. "You're naive," Trump snapped. "You think speech is harmless? You think lies don't kill? People die because of disinformation. Elections are stolen because of disinformation. And you're too busy chasing headlines to see it." Musk's expression softened, almost pitying. "Lies don't die because they're censored," he replied. "They die because they're exposed. And you don't expose lies by hiding them. You expose them by confronting them in the open." He stepped closer to the edge of the stage, his voice now carrying the weight of a closing argument. "The most dangerous governments in history didn't rise because they allowed too much speech. They rose because they silenced dissent, because they told people, 'We'll decide what's true.' And once people believed that, the truth disappeared." The crowd was silent now. Even those who had booed him earlier were listening. "Here's the paradox you refuse to see," Musk continued. "Regulation doesn't protect democracy. It gives power over democracy. And whoever holds that power, whether it's a president or a party or a committee, eventually uses it to silence anyone who threatens them. It's not a guardrail. It's a weapon." Trump shifted uneasily. "So what, Elon? We do nothing? We just let the enemies of America flood the system with poison?" "No," Musk said almost gently. "We do the hard thing. We trust the people. We trust the open exchange of ideas, even the ugly ones, because that's the only way the truth survives. Democracy is not a child to be sheltered. It's a muscle that grows stronger through struggle." A few claps broke the silence. Then more, and then suddenly a wave of applause rolled through the hall. Musk didn't bask in it. He wasn't finished. "You call me reckless," he said, turning fully toward Trump now. "But what's reckless is pretending that politicians, any politicians, should decide what Americans are allowed to say. What's reckless is thinking that power won't eventually be turned against the very people it claims to protect. Today it's foreign trolls. Tomorrow it's domestic critics. And then one day, it's anyone who disagrees with you. Trump tried to interject, but Musk's momentum was unstoppable. You built your brand on speaking directly to the people, uncensored, unfiltered. And now you want to close that door behind you. That's not leadership. That's fear. The jab landed hard. Trump bristled. You think you're so righteous, Elon? You're just another billionaire playing God with technology. Musk smiled faintly. I'm not playing God, he replied. I'm trying to make sure no one else does. The applause swelled again, louder this time, punctuated by whistles and cheers. Even some who had come expecting to side with Trump were now nodding along. Musk stepped back from the mic, pausing as the noise washed over him. Then he delivered the line that would ricochet across every platform within minutes. True free speech isn't about protecting the powerful, he said, his voice steady as stone. It's about protecting the powerless from them. The reaction was instantaneous. The hall exploded into applause, people rising to their feet, phones held aloft to capture the moment. It wasn't just a sound, it was a release. A collective exhale from a nation that had been choking on the question of who really controlled its public square. And for the first time all night, Donald Trump looked rattled. His jaw worked silently, searching for a retort that wouldn't come. His eyes darted toward the cameras that had once been his allies, now drinking in a moment he didn't own. Still, he wasn't done. This isn't over, he growled, gripping the sides of his podium. The American people don't want chaos. They want safety. They want order. And they'll get it. Musk's reply was almost a whisper, but it cut sharper than any shout. Order without freedom isn't safety, he said. It's obedience. Silence followed, deep, almost reverent silence. Even the moderators, who had been scrambling all night to keep control, seemed frozen. It was the kind of silence that marked a turning point, not just in a debate, but in the story a country tells itself. Somewhere in that silence, a truth crystallized. This wasn't a clash between a politician and a billionaire. It was a collision between two visions of America, one that trusted its people and one that feared them. The cameras captured Trump's face, defiant, flushed, but unmistakably shaken. They captured Musk's, calm, resolute, unflinching, and they captured an audience that understood it was witnessing more than a debate. It was witnessing a reckoning. But as the lights blazed and the applause thundered, a deeper storm was already gathering, one that would rage far beyond that stage. And the shockwaves from that moment were only just beginning. The debate may have ended on that stage, but the war that followed would rage far beyond its walls. Within minutes of the final exchange, social media detonated like a digital earthquake. Hashtags erupted across platforms, trending worldwide before Musk and Trump had even left the building. Musk meltdown. Your Trump exposed. Free speech war. Democracy on trial. Each tag told a different story, and together, they painted a portrait of a nation split not just by politics, but by competing visions of its future. On X, the platform Musk had promised to turn into the global town square, clips of his power versus powerless line racked up tens of millions of views in hours. Some called it the Gettysburg Address of the digital age. Others mocked him as a billionaire anarchist playing philosopher. Yet even his critics couldn't deny the moment's magnitude. Whether you love him or hate him, wrote one pundit, Elon Musk just redrew the battlefield for free speech. Over on Truth Social, Trump's loyalists went into overdrive. Musk sides with foreign influence, blared one post with tens of thousands of shares. He's protecting disinformation to protect his profits, wrote another. Yet beneath the bombast, a quieter anxiety began to creep in. For the first time in years, Trump's words weren't the most viral part of a political showdown. Musk's were. Cable networks cleared their schedules for emergency panels. CNN called it the most consequential debate about speech since the dawn of social media. Fox News accused Musk of tech elitism masquerading as patriotism. MSNBC aired a split-screen montage of Musk's takedowns alongside Trump's red-faced interruptions, narrating the power shift in real time. But the most striking reactions came from Washington itself. Lawmakers lined up on opposite sides of the digital fault line. Senator Maria Delgado praised Musk's stance as a reminder that the First Amendment is not a partisan toy, Senator Rick Jameson slammed him as dangerously naive about the realities of national security. Even President Biden, speaking cautiously, noted that the balance between liberty and safety is one America will have to grapple with again. The ripple effects extended beyond politics. In Silicon Valley, investors and executives held emergency calls late into the night. X's daily active users spiked by nearly 20% in 48 hours. Advertising inquiries surged, and Musk's allies whispered about a new golden era for the platform, one where its unapologetic stance on speech could make it the most influential arena in global politics. Meanwhile, Trump's orbit scrambled to contain the fallout. Truth Social briefly surged as conservatives rallied behind the former president, but analysts noted something ominous. New sign-ups plateaued quickly, and engagement dipped after the debate. Trump is still the loudest voice, wrote one media strategist, but he's no longer the only one shaping the conversation. That's new, and it's dangerous for him. Editorial pages turned the clash into an existential question. The Washington Post ran with the headline, "Regulate or Risk: America's Free Speech Crossroads." The Wall Street Journal countered, "Musk is right, government shouldn't be the arbiter of truth." Even The Atlantic, often skeptical of Musk, admitted that his framing of regulation as power over speech was a rhetorical shift likely to echo for years. And then came the memes, thousands of them. Musk as David slinging tweets at Goliath, Trump in a tuxedo labeled censorship. A side-by-side of the two men captioned, "Control versus chaos. Choose your fighter." What began as a political argument had transformed into a cultural phenomenon, but perhaps the most telling reaction wasn't online at all. In coffee shops, classrooms, and town halls across the country, ordinary Americans began debating a question that had long simmered beneath the surface. Who decides what we're allowed to say? For some, Trump's argument resonated. "We need guardrails," said one voter in Ohio. "You can't just let lies run wild and hope people figure it out." For others, Musk's message struck a deeper chord. "Freedom is messy," a teacher in Texas told a reporter. "But the alternative is worse. It's silence. And silence is how democracies die." Even abroad, the confrontation rippled through political circles. European regulators cited Musk's remarks as proof that U.S. tech companies were resisting global oversight. Leaders in authoritarian states mocked the debate as proof that Western democracy is unraveling. And dissidents from Iran to Hong Kong praised Musk as a rare ally in their fight to speak freely online. The narrative, once dominated by Trump's populist fury, had shifted. Musk had not only held his ground, he had reframed the entire conversation. What had started as a clash of egos was now a referendum on the meaning of freedom itself. And yet, beneath the viral moments and fiery op-eds, a more profound realization began to take hold. This wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning. Congress prepared hearings on digital speech. Courts eyed new cases on platform liability. Activists mobilized, corporations recalibrated, and political strategists rewrote their playbooks. Debate had not just changed how Americans talked about free speech. It had changed the stakes of who would control it. And as the world continued to argue, meme, legislate, and invest in the fallout, one truth became undeniable. This wasn't just about two men. It was about who would write the next chapter of American democracy. When the lights faded and the stage emptied, what lingered wasn't just the memory of two men trading blows. It was the echo of a deeper question reverberating across the republic. What is free speech in the 21st century? And more importantly, who gets to define it? For Elon Musk, the answer wasn't found in policy papers or congressional hearings. It was written into the DNA of every revolution that ever reshaped the world. Power, he said in a quiet moment after the debate, always tries to control the conversation. That's how it survives. But freedom only exists when people are willing to resist that control. It was a sentiment that transcended the theatrics of the night. Strip away the insults and sound bites, and the clash between Musk and Trump was never truly about content moderation or platform policies. It was about something far more elemental. The eternal tug-of-war between authority and liberty, order and dissent, silence and voice. History, after all, is full of governments and institutions that tried to muzzle the inconvenient. From pamphleteers jailed for criticizing kings to whistleblowers silenced for exposing truths. The story repeats. Power seeks control, and speech is always the first target. The First Amendment was not written to protect the comfortable or the powerful. It was written as a shield for the vulnerable, the controversial, the unpopular, and yet, that principle is tested anew with every technological leap. Social media isn't just a new platform. It's a new battlefield. Billions now speak, share, and organize through tools that didn't exist a generation ago. And those tools, wielded by private hands and shaped by political forces, can elevate voices or erase them. That reality makes the question of who decides more urgent than ever. Musk's vision is radical in its simplicity. Trust people more than institutions. Let speech breathe, even when it offends, even when it unsettles. The answer to bad speech isn't less speech, he said once. It's more speech. It's a philosophy that unnerves governments and agitates advertisers. But it's also one that echoes the raw spirit of democracy itself. A messy, unpredictable, yet resilient experiment built on the belief that truth can emerge from open debate. Trump's vision, for all its contradictions, reflects a deep anxiety many Americans share, that unregulated platforms can become tools of chaos, that foreign adversaries and malicious actors can weaponize speech to fracture societies. It's not an unreasonable fear, but the danger, Musk argues, is letting that fear justify control, because once control becomes the norm, speech is no longer free. It's permitted. And permitted speech is power's favorite disguise. The lesson of the night was bigger than either man. It was that the struggle over speech is not a relic of the past. It is the defining fight of our future. It will shape how we govern, how we innovate, how we connect, and how we define ourselves as a people. And it forces a question that cannot be outsourced to billionaires. Presidents or algorithms? Who decides what we can say? Is it government with its impulse to legislate and regulate? Is it corporations with their bottom lines and brand safety concerns? Or is it us, flawed, passionate, diverse, trusting one another enough to risk being offended in pursuit of being free? The answer will determine more than the fate of a platform or a political career. It will determine the soul of the republic, because speech isn't free if it only protects the powerful. It's free when it shields the powerless. It's free when it gives voice to the silenced, space to the inconvenient, and courage to the unpopular. And that perhaps was the true revelation of this confrontation. It was never about Elon Musk or Donald Trump. They were merely the latest actors in a centuries-long drama over who controls the narrative and whether democracy can survive. When that control tightens its grip, the cameras may have stopped rolling, the hashtags may fade, and the news cycle will move on. But the question they raised will remain, because the future of speech will define the future of democracy. And in that arena, the battle is only beginning. In the end, what began as a clash of egos became something far larger. A defining moment in America's ongoing struggle over who controls the conversation. Donald Trump stormed onto that stage determined to paint free speech as a danger, a threat too powerful to leave unchecked. Elon Musk stood his ground and flipped the script, reframing speech not as a privilege to be managed, but as a right to be defended. Messy, uncomfortable, and essential to democracy's survival. And that's what this showdown was always really about. Not tweets or algorithms, not platforms or profits. It was about power, and whether it belongs to the few who seek to shape our reality, or to the many who dare to speak it. Musk's message rang through the noise. Freedom is not granted by politicians or preserved by billionaires. It lives and breathes in the people, in us. Every time we refuse to be silenced. If you believe the future of speech and democracy belongs to the people, not to those who fear our voices, then you're in the right place. This is your home. Subscribe to Liberty Leak for daily political drama, jaw-dropping clashes, and stories that remind us of one unshakable truth. In America, freedom still has a voice. Because these battles are far from over, and the next one might just change everything. So join us. Be part of the movement. Add your voice to the chorus that refuses to be quiet. This is more than a channel. It's a front line. It's a promise. This is Liberty Leak, and here the truth always gets the last word.